You know, when we think about what people pack when they move across the world, we usually picture like tangible things.
Right, yeah. The physical stuff.
Exactly, like photographs curling at the edges or maybe a favorite piece of clothing.
Or, a family heirloom that's just wrapped carefully in, like, tons of bubble wrap to survive a transoceanic flight.
Totally, just trying to get it there in one piece. And those are the physical anchors to a life left behind.
They are. I mean, they take up space in a suitcase, but they really reassure us that our history is still real.
They do. But I feel like the heaviest things we carry aren't physical at all.
Oh, absolutely not.
There are languages, our inherited memories, and, our cultural
There's
heritage.
things you can't put in a box.
Exactly. And so, for today's deep dive, we are exploring a man who basically packed his entire literary universe into his mind and carried it across 3 different countries.
It's quite a journey.
It really is. We are looking at a book of Urdu poetry. It's titled Zar-e-Daagh Adil, which translates to The Wealth of the Heart's Scars.
Such a powerful title.
Right. And it was written by the late Urooj Akhtar Zaidi. And just to be super clear, right up front for you listening, we are not just doing like a standard literary review today.
No, definitely not.
We are tracking a map. We're looking at how a scholar used poetry not just to process his emotions, but to literally chart his physical relocation across the globe.
Yeah, it's a geographic record as much as an emotional one.
Okay, let's unpack this by starting with the extraordinary timeline of Zaidi's life, because his biography holds the key to why this poetry even exists in the first place.
Oh, absolutely. To understand the poetry, you really have to understand the geography and the history he lived through.
Right.
So, Urooj Akhtar Zaidi was born on February 15, 1942, in Bijnor, India. And that year, 1942, is crucial.
Because it's right before partition.
Exactly. He was born just 5 years before the partition of India in 1947.
And I want to pause on that for a second because for anyone who hasn't studied South Asian history, partition sounds like this simple bureaucratic division.
Right, like drawing a line on a map.
Yeah, but it was anything but that. When the British left, the subcontinent was basically cleaved in two, creating independent India and Pakistan.
And it triggered one of the largest, most violent mass migrations in human history.
It's staggering. Millions of people were displaced just crossing borders overnight. Entire cultural hubs were suddenly severed.
Yeah. So Zaidi is born into a world on the brink of this immense fracture.
And he eventually adopts Pakistan as his home, right?
He does. And then decades later, he migrates again. He ends up settling in the freezing winters of Canada.
Quite a climate shift.
Oh, totally. He actually passed away in Windsor, Ontario, fairly recently, on March 8th, 2021.
Wow. So that's a life spanning nearly 8 decades.
Almost 80 years, yeah.
Yeah.
Marked by these massive geopolitical shifts. And he's survived by his wife, Shabana, and his children, Aliyah, Arshia, and Amr.
It's a huge legacy.
It is. But what makes him such a compelling figure, and this is where it gets really interesting, is his intellectual trajectory.
Right, because he wasn't like a full-time poet by trade.
No, not at all. Zaidi wasn't some bohemian poet just wandering the streets. He was a deeply entrenched academic.
Yeah, his resume is intense.
It really is. He held a master's degree in English, another master's in political science, and then eventually he earned a PhD in political science.
And he spent his professional life as a teacher.
Exactly.
This is the contrast that completely grabbed me when we were prepping for this deep dive. You look at his credentials, right? A PhD in political science.
Uh-huh.
That is a highly rigorous empirical field. You are dealing with hard data, systems of governance, voting behaviors,
Structural analysis, all of that.
all of that. And yet the ultimate artifact he leaves behind for his family and the world is a volume of classical Urdu poetry.
Yeah, it seems like a contradiction at first.
It's wild. It's like finding out a structural engineer who, designs concrete overpasses, is secretly painting these breathtaking, ethereal watercolor landscapes on the weekends.
That's a great way to put it.
Right. My initial thought was that these are 2 completely separate compartments of a person's brain. Like one is all logic and the other is all emotion.
It's a very natural assumption to make. But what's fascinating here is how deeply connected those 2 minds actually are.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, let's look at the specific poetic form he chose. He wrote ghazals.
Okay.
And to write a ghazal, you don't just, spill your feelings onto a page. It is an incredibly demanding, highly architectural form of poetry.
This has a lot of rules, right?
So many rules.
Mm-hmm.
A ghazal consists of autonomous couplets. That means each two-line stanza has to be a complete, self-contained thought.
Wow. 2 lines to say everything.
Exactly. Furthermore, you have to follow strict, unyielding rules of meter, rhyme, and there's this repeating refrain at the end of the couplets.
So it's essentially an engineering problem disguised as art.
That is precisely what it is.
You have this massive, overwhelming human emotion, and you have exactly 2 lines to deliver a profound emotional gut punch.
All while following a rigid mathematical structure. You've hit the nail on the head.
That's incredible.
And think about his day job. A political scientist's entire job is to observe chaotic, complex human behaviors, like how societies cope with war, migration, loss.
Yeah.
And then they synthesize those massive realities into clear, structured arguments.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
Right. Zaidi didn't abandon his analytical mind to write poetry. He weaponized it.
Wow.
The ghazal was actually the perfect vessel for an academic mind to process the immense trauma of displacement.
That makes the title of the book so much more striking to me now. Daagh, The Wealth of the Heart's Scars.
It's beautiful.
And he opens the entire collection with a couplet by Mir Taqi Mir, right?
Yes.
Who is basically like the Shakespeare of 18th century Urdu poetry.
Pretty much, yeah.
And the couplet roughly translates to, let me make sure I have this right. Few are those who recognize the wealth of the heart's scars. One needs a discerning eye to evaluate it.
That's the one. And by choosing that specific couplet to introduce his life's work, Zaidi is establishing a very specific worldview right from page 1.
How?
He is telling us that pain, loss, and the scars of a transient life, they're not injuries to be hidden away.
Right.
They are currency. They are the very things that give a person value.
The wealth.
Exactly. But it's a quiet wealth. It requires a discerning eye, like the couplet says, to recognize that this man, sitting quietly in Windsor, Ontario, is literally carrying the historical weight of the South Asian diaspora inside him.
And the dedication is beautiful, too. He dedicates this wealth to the bride of poetry.
He does.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because he offers this wealth with almost jarring humility.
He really downplays his own talent.
Totally. In the preface, which he wrote near the end of his life in August 2019 from Windsor, he explicitly writes that he does not consider himself a professional poet.
Right. He refuses to place himself on a pedestal.
Which is crazy when you read the work.
Yeah.
But instead, he credits his entire poetic output to the atmosphere of his childhood.
Yeah, it's upbringing.
His father was a history professor, right? And their house in India was this vibrant literary hub.
Constantly filled with famous poets.
Just intellectuals having these deep philosophical debates in the living room.
So he literally grew up breathing the meter and rhyme of Urdu.
It was in the walls.
Exactly. For him, poetry wasn't like a career ambition. It was his native psychological language.
I love that phrase, native psychological language.
And this brings us to a crucial mechanism of the diaspora experience. When someone leaves their homeland permanently, continuing the literary traditions of their childhood isn't just a hobby.
No.
It actually acts as a cognitive survival mechanism.
It's like the creation of a mobile homeland.
Yes, a mental sanctuary.
Ah.
Just think about the reality of his daily life in Canada.
Okay.
The external world around him operates entirely in English. The physical landscape is probably buried in snow half the year.
Right, he's in Windsor.
And the cultural touchstones of his youth are literally thousands of miles away.
It must feel so isolating.
But internally, when he sits down to write, he can retreat. He can go back to the warmth, the vocabulary, and the cultural safety of Urdu.
It is a way to guard the mind against the alienation of a foreign land.
Exactly.
But, here is where Zaidi's work takes a really unexpected turn for me.
How?
Yeah, because he doesn't just retreat into this abstract, timeless world of poetry. He actually forcefully drags that classical poetry into his modern physical reality.
The timestamps.
Yes. When you read through the table of contents and the poems themselves, they are just given vague romantic titles.
No, they're highly specific.
They are meticulously time-stamped with dates and geographical locations spanning decades.
It reads more like a captain's log than a traditional poetry collection.
It really does. You are turning the pages and seeing labels like Arch 78, then Toronto 81, Toronto 82.
Windsor 85, Windsor 87.
Right. London 89, December 90, Toronto, October 91. He is leaving a literal breadcrumb trail of his physical movements across the globe.
He's mapping it out.
But I want to challenge you on this because it strikes me as a bit of a paradox.
Okay, let's hear it.
On one hand, human longing is totally geography-proof, right? Like a broken heart or a sense of alienation, it feels the exact same whether you are in 18th century Delhi or 1989 London.
That's true.
So does adding a location like Toronto 81 to an ancient poetic form like the Ghazal actually do anything to modernize it? Or is it just like administrative record keeping?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture of how these poems work, the timestamps are doing something incredibly radical.
Really?
Yeah. You're right that longing is a universal human baseline, but the context of the longing changes everything.
Okay, unpack that.
Traditional Urdu ghazals rely on a very specific set of Eastern imageries. The nightingale, the rose garden, the harsh desert.
The caravan moving through the night.
Exactly. So when you stamp Windsor, Ontario, 1985, onto a poem that's utilizing the imagery of a desert caravan.
Oh, wow. It creates this jarring, almost surreal friction.
That friction is the magic of the book. It highlights the profound isolation of the immigrant.
Because the environment doesn't match the internal reality.
Right. He is actively utilizing a language and a set of metaphors that the people walking outside his window in Canada cannot possibly understand.
That's wild to think about.
The timestamp anchors the ethereal, timeless nature of the ghazal to the cold, hard, industrial reality of the Western diaspora.
It grounds it.
It proves that the ancient form is actually resilient enough to hold the modern immigrant experience.
There's a specific phrase he uses early in the text on page 2, I think, that really captures that tension.
Oh, Tarki Watan.
Yes, Tark-e-Watan, which translates to abandoning or leaving the homeland.
A very heavy phrase.
Extremely. He writes about the crushing weight of that departure, but he notes that despite this immense loss, he somehow finds the courage to keep living.
And the poetry itself seems to be the engine of that courage.
Right. Just imagine mapping your own emotional life exclusively through geography.
It's a fascinating exercise.
Instead of naming a journal entry like the day I realized I couldn't go back, you just label it Toronto 82. It forces you, as the reader, to confront the physical distance between the poet's body and his soul.
And that distance wasn't just geographical, It was temporal.
What do you mean?
Well, he wasn't just separated from the places of his youth. As the decades went on, he was watching the people who defined his youth pass away.
Oh, right.
And this is a recurring theme that dominates a huge portion of the book.
Which brings us to the section titled Yadi Raftigan.
Yes, remembering the departed.
This part of the book is filled with extensive elegies and tributes, and he's mourning family members and personal friends, sure, but he dedicates a massive amount of ink to monumental figures in Urdu literature.
The legends.
Absolute legends. The text lists poetic tributes to names like Farrokh, Faiz Ahmad Faiz, Josh Miliabadi.
John Elia, Mohsin Bhopali.
Right. And for listeners who might not be immersed in South Asian literature, it's really vital to understand the scale of these names.
Yeah, these men weren't just popular writers.
No.
They were the architects of the 20th century cultural and political consciousness in India and Pakistan.
It would be like an American expatriate living in Tokyo writing these desperate, beautiful elegies because Hemingway, Frost, and Steinbeck had all just died back home.
That's a great comparison.
He's not just mourning a person, he's mourning the closing of an entire literary epoch.
An entire era.
But I have to ask, and so what does this all mean? Like, why does an academic, someone who insists in his preface that he is just a humble student of poetry, dedicate so much of his life's work to conversing with these literary giants from across the ocean?
This raises an important question about identity and duty, because it is essentially an act of fierce cultural defiance.
Defiance.
Think about it. Remember that Zaidi is writing these tributes from Canada.
Right.
When you migrate, the culture you left behind shifts. It goes from being the water you swim in every day to a fragile heirloom that you have to actively protect.
Oh, wow, yeah.
By writing these elaborate, highly structured elegies for Faiz or Farrokh, he wasn't merely expressing sadness that they were gone.
I was stepping into the arena.
Exactly. He was participating in a grand, ongoing cultural conversation.
He's proving that the lineage didn't die with them.
And it didn't stop at the borders of the subcontinent.
He was sending a message across time and space.
He was saying, look, I am sitting here in the freezing winters of Ontario. You, the masters of this language, are gone. But the language you championed is still alive in me.
I am still keeping the strict meter. I am still writing the rhymes.
Yes, it's an absolute refusal to let the culture be erased by distance or death.
It's almost as if he's tending to this magnificent garden that just happens to be planted thousands of miles away.
Right.
And he's watering it purely through the sheer force of his memory so it doesn't wither in his own mind.
That's a beautiful way to look at it.
When you view it through that lens, Zar-e Dagh Dil is so much more than a collection of couplets. It completely reframes how we view nostalgia.
Oh, completely.
We often think of nostalgia as this passive, sometimes like pathetic weakness,
Yeah.
looking backward because you can't handle the present.
Right, being stuck in the past.
But Zaidi turns nostalgia into a highly structured analytical tool for cultural survival.
And that is really the core insight of his life's work. The wealth of the heart's scars isn't just his personal pain.
It's bigger than him.
It's the collective grief of the diaspora.
Mhm.
It is the heavy, beautiful burden of watching an era pass,
Mhm.
of losing the literary heroes of your childhood, and then deciding to carry the weight of that legacy on your own shoulders in a totally foreign land.
And he did it with the emotional depth of a poet and the rigorous, structured mind of a political scientist.
Someone who understands exactly what a society loses when its giants fade away.
It's incredible. He basically built a bridge between his highly analytical English-speaking present in North America and his deeply emotional Urdu-speaking past in South Asia.
He really did.
He proved that you can be totally immersed in a new world, surrounded by a different language, and still maintain a thriving internal sanctuary of heritage.
It's a profound testament to the endurance of the human spirit. I mean, language, when utilized this way, isn't just a method of communication. It is a lifeline.
It really is. And, it leaves us with something incredibly powerful to consider about our own lives.
What's that?
When we move away from the places that formed us, whether that's immigrating to a new hemisphere or, just moving out of our childhood town, do we use our inherited traditions simply to hold tightly to the past?
Or do we use them as the very tools that help us interpret and survive our completely new world? That's the question, isn't it? If you had to write the ghazal of your own life, what cities, what years, and what specific memories would timestamp your most important verses?
That is a brilliant question to leave on. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into Urooj Akhtar Zaidi's journey and the remarkable wealth of the heart's scars. We appreciate you taking the time to explore this with us, and we'll catch you on the next one.